Today's meeting is with Allison Paradise. And I think we're both really excited about this one. Allison is a neuroscientist with degrees from Harvard and Brown, but also she is the founder of a startup retreat center for kids called the Epicenter. I've gotten to know Allison personally well over the last couple of years. I count her as a friend, and she's really helped me become a better parent with some practical advice. And I guess the preamble for this episode, this is a series on wisdom. And I have my successful wife's criticism ringing in my ears, which is, are any of these ideas bringing you back into the world, or are they taking you further up into your head? Are they taking away from the relationships that matter? And I think that something that comes out over and over again is the wisdom is knowing what's important to pay attention to. And I think there's nothing more important than learning how to pay attention to our kids and our human relationships. And Alison has a lot of very nuanced opinions on that. So, Alison, I don't know where we need to start, but it is, I guess, traditional to do a little bit of autobiography. So if you wouldn't mind just giving me, a few minutes on sort of who you are and where you came from, and then we can get into the fun stuff.
Sure. I'm Allison. Hi.
Uh,
The most important thing. Um, Try to think what's most relevant. I grew up in maybe I would say a non-traditional way. And I think that helped informed quite a bit of the work that I do now, although I didn't realize it at the time. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of sort of things happening that we couldn't necessarily explain. So I had a sort of a telepathic relationship with my father. There were a lot of sort of insights into the world that maybe other people didn't necessarily have growing up. And this sort of was the foundation, I think, of my understanding of humans. And I was always really fascinated by humanity. And when my sister was born, I was 3, and I saw in her this incredible beauty and light that was just mesmerizing, and I'd never seen it before her being born. And that really struck me, even at that young of an age, of why was that so visible in her and so dim in the other people who are around me. So I studied neuroscience because I thought that might help me better understand people and might help me better understand these sorts of experiences that I'd had. And it didn't quite do that, but it propelled me on a really interesting trajectory of trying to understand ourselves in a scientific perspective. And then I started an organization that worked in science and sustainability, and that was all about behavior change. So it really helped me better understand how to approach behavior change in a way that's lasting. So when we talk about later some of the things that we suggest that people try, we always try to approach them in a way that this isn't something that you're going to try on for a day and then take off the next day, because that doesn't really last and it's not meaningful. And then from there, founded and started the Epicenter and began working in earnest with kids, which is something I'd always wanted to do as a kid, but was told I wasn't allowed to do. So it took me a long time to get here. I'm really glad I am.
So the reason why I know you is through the wonderful Dr. Mona Subani, who wrote an exceptional book on psychic abilities and how well documented and robustly proven they are. And I appreciate if you're coming to this interview cold, you'll already be like, wait, what? And probably want a little bit more context for that. And Alison, you just casually dropped in that you had a telepathic relationship with your father. Um, I I think that maybe the way to take this to a question is you've helped me really understand the role of intuition in children's development, something that we don't just ignore, we actively repress. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If you observe children at a young age, you'll notice that they know in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, they don't know everything. They're really young, but they really do know their preferences. They know to trust themselves. They'll oftentimes know where their limits are, and if they don't know where they are, they get really close or just past them, and then they don't tend to get super badly hurt. They can sense when we as adults don't feel well. You notice that kids will often come over to adults that are sad and just kind of give them a cuddle. They know things, and this is part of something that I also experienced as a kid and then somehow managed to not lose entirely as I grew older, partially because I felt like it was really cultivated in my family to be in touch with that. That knowing, that intuition is, from my perspective, one of the most powerful gifts that we have. And Tom, you're right that everything we do to children seeks to remove them or remove that connection to our intuition. So to give you an example, let's say when we work with kids, they like to climb trees, they're kids. So if a kid starts climbing a tree and I say, you're going to fall down get down from there, right? You're going to hurt yourself, get down from there. I start putting in a knowing into their minds that they should be afraid and that they're going to get hurt. But that wasn't there before. They fearlessly just start climbing the trees. And actually, you watch kids and they'll know where their limits are. Some of them will go all the way to the top. Some of them won't go all the way to the top, but they sense and know for themselves what's true. We instill a lot of fear.
I feel one of the better pieces of advice you've given me, of many, is this idea of emotional granularity. That something that comes out from all of my work is that, we navigate the world through emotions and we navigate it somatically. And the more words you have for your emotions, the more accurately you can navigate the world. It's relatively simple, but a deep concept. People are literally healthier. People are mentally and physically and psychologically healthier when they have greater emotional granularity. But one thing you brought to my awareness was the idea that kids are mirrors, kids know. And so if you're having a bad day or experiencing an emotion, one, you should open up to your kid and say, I've got a 5-year-old who you've met and a 2-year-old, and maybe the 2-year-old's a little young, you'll tell me, but the 5-year-old, I'll take Jack aside and I'll be like, Daddy got a crappy email and now he's really angry about it. And that means that Jack realizes it's not his fault that Daddy's angry, but also Jack learns to normalize the idea of communication of emotions. And he often reacts to it in very strange and unpredictable ways. That he'll tell me about a nightmare that he had from like a year ago, that just to share. And it's really opened up a new dimension of experience between us.
It's so true. It's really amazing how our culture seeks to try to make it seem like we're always happy and everything's always great. And when you do that, it really messes with kids' intuition because they know things aren't right, but you're telling them that everything's all right. So then they don't understand, why do I feel something's off? But if you can just ask the question, how are you feeling? So this is in our work all the time. And even in my relationships with adults, how are you feeling? And then we put up the rules. You can't say good because, oh goodness, does that just like auto response for everybody? You can't say bad. You have to be more specific about what it is you're actually experiencing. And we do a check-in regularly in our classes and even with each other. How are you feeling? And then we're honest about it, because then they can really gauge their own intuition. Well, oh, I was sensing something felt tense in the room. Here's a reason why. This person is feeling a little bit frustrated. And if I'm starting to feel frustrated with something, I'll say to the kids, oh, I'm starting to feel a bit frustrated. I'm going to take a breath and explain to them like why I would do this. I'm having an emotional response. It's not really where I want to be right now. So here's a way that I can regulate myself back to a different place. And what we find is that the kids then immediately respond to that. So you can feel it in the room, or you can feel it when you're with another person. And being able to talk about it just kind of takes all the wind out of, imagine it's a balloon that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, about to pop. If you just talk about it, it just sucks it right back out. It's so effective.
So this is where I need help. The Jonathan Haidt stuff and the Tristan Harris stuff, basically showing that your phone is evil and needs to be put down as much as possible. Like, they've done a really good job mainstreaming that. Don't ignore your kids. This is relatively straightforward advice. Yet I really struggle. And I think this reflects my weaknesses as a parent, but maybe some other people will understand this as well, which is like, the phone's really interesting and kids sometimes are not. Like, how can you help me?
So I love how honest that was. It's just beautifully honest. So I want to say, with regard to the phone, when it comes to attention, there's a quality to attention. we speak about attention and presence in sort of these broad terms, but there's gradations of those. So, for example, I could not be looking at my phone. I could be having this conversation and I could be making a grocery list in my head. I'm not attentive. And if you're a child, you're going to sense that because they're really sensitive beings, especially at very young ages. And actually, as an adult, you're probably sensing that too, but you might not be aware of it because there's all these other layers and ways that we've suppressed our intuition on and on. So that's one level of attention. So you're not looking at your phone, you're looking up, but your mind is completely gone or someplace else. And not only can people sense that, but your responses tend to be reflective of that, right? They're kind of like, uh-huh,
Mm.
uh-huh. Yep, got that. Uh, and that leads kids to even more kind of like grabbing on because they know they don't have your full attention. So then they start doing more things to get at your attention. Okay, well, they're looking at me, but they're not hearing me. So what else do I need to do? Like maybe I'll scream or maybe I'll jump or go, look, watch this, watch this. Which I remember doing an awful lot as a kid, and my mom looking out the window and going, and then
Uh-huh.
turning back to whatever she was doing. Um, and then if you go further down, there's the sort of attention where you're not thinking of something else and you're listening, but you're associating. So everything that somebody says to you, you associate and it branches off into a million different thoughts. This is a common way that people will listen. So they'll say, a kid might tell you a story about a bird and you go, oh my gosh, I saw a bird once, right? It goes over here. They have no interest in this. And it sounds like you're not really listening because they have a story they want to tell you. So there's that form of listening, and we do that a lot as adults. We listen for a keyword that branches off into something else, and then we free associate with that. And we're never really connecting, we're sort of talking past each other. And then there's the sort of listening where you're awash in it. It's hard to form the words of it, it just sort of it flows over you, and when you respond, it's effortless. So you're not free associating, you're directly engaged with what is being said to you. And that form of attention is very pure, it's very potent. And if you can do that and be fully engaged, I think you'll find it's actually fascinating. It's not really boring because you're flowing with somebody in this beautiful creative space, because then you start to co-create the conversation, letting the kids guide it. I find that space to be less exhausting than all the others and to be the most interesting. It takes a lot of work though. So I'm saying this like, oh, then you just do this, you just do this. But to do that, you have to be able to quiet your own thoughts and stop all the free associations. And that takes some practice. So to do that, I would suggest doing focusing exercises to be able to really be present with somebody. And what we find is that when they get a drop of that sort of attention, not drop, but a few minutes of it, they're actually okay on their own. So I'm more than happy to spend 5 hours giving that level of attention to a child, but I understand that that's not possible for everybody. But in our classes, we'll go around and spend a minute or two with each kid. And that alone, that sort of, I see you, I'm right here with you, is enough to have them feel this boost of confidence and ability to keep going on their own and not need constantly to be pulling at us, which is what I think is very difficult for adults, because you need to attend to other things and you can't have somebody always hanging on your coattails, Hey, look at me, look at me, look at me. So the purer you can get it, the more potent it is. It's my suggestion.
I feel like I'm, even when I'm doing like an interview like this, I'm always sitting here trying to work out the hook for the next question and what I'm trying to do. So I'm acutely aware of what you just said. Like I've tried to do this with my boy, where I'm like, I'm gonna do this beautiful thing Allison does, where I just open up and I am authentically curious about him. Like I love him so much and I want a better connection with him. But often I'm like, I ask him what I think of these really lovely open-ended questions, and he'll kind of like he'll like go completely tangential, or he won't open up, or like it's very hard for me to like I keep expecting it to blossom into this beautiful moment, and it doesn't. And I think I get quite worked up and like upset with myself
Mm.
that it isn't working. Like, how do I handle that?
Oh, that's so interesting. So is it not working only from your perspective? Like, do you feel like it's working from his perspective?
It's a great question. I think maybe I'm expecting it to be like this profound moment of mutual focus, and he's not great at making like direct eye contact. He's always kind of flying around the room. Like he doesn't, I think, have any attention issues, but like he's a very observant kid and he's constantly observing other
Yes.
things. So
Yeah.
I'm expecting him to kind of come together to like a central point and be present for me when I'm being present for him. And when that doesn't get mirrored, I'm like, am I doing this wrong? Is he not paying attention to me? I get triggered by the lack of him offering me the same respect that I'm offering back to him. So I found this exercise. It works sometimes really, really well, but sometimes I find it quite frustrating.
So interesting. Okay, I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna giggle a little because it's funny to me. Like he's 5, right?
Yeah, he's five. He's five. Right. Okay, fine, fine. Like I am, yeah, I'm putting too much on myself. I also, I don't want to screw him up early. I see so many parents not paying enough attention to their kids or paying the wrong attention to their kids. I'm addicted to Twitter. I love it. I've got a lot of friends on there, but I am like I get extra triggered when I see him not paying good attention to things because I know he's
Mm,
learning it from me. And this feels like a really urgent problem, and I'm pretty sure that it's not an isolated issue.
I see. So, well, for one, are you able to do things on the phone away from him? Or does he always have to be in the space where you're on the phone?
We live in a small apartment in Manhattan, and the fact remains, like, I'm going to be honest, right? You know, like, I'll finish work at 5, and
Mhm.
then they'll go to bed around like 8 or 9. The idea that I'm going to be perpetually focused on them or that they'll be playing quietly to themselves over the course of 4 hours is just ludicrous,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so, like, I've tried to be intentional about times I'm on or off my phone, but I think a lot of people will have this equivalent situation where like that's a huge block of time to fill,
Yes.
and the idea that like I won't be on my phone during those times. I know you're really, really disciplined about that because of your work. It just has it seems like an unrealistic standard, although I have
Hmm.
put my phone on do not disturb from 6 to 7, where I just don't have any notifications, so I have nothing
Hmm.
incoming, but that doesn't
Hmm.
still doesn't stop me doing outgoing, you know.
Okay. So when we have to have the phone on for class, what I usually do with the kids is I always explain, hey, I'm going to be taking a break right now. I need to use the phone because for this reason. So it's always like, this is for a reason. It's not for, I'm bored, I'm trying to entertain myself, I'm trying to distract myself from you. I need a moment. Because I do get that a lot from the kids that they will say, well, my parents will say, I just need a minute away from you. And then they go and turn to their phone. So if you can say, I'm checking it because I think somebody's texted about something, or I need to check this thing, or this is something that has to happen, it definitely changes the why and the understanding that your attention is now moved to a different place. So even in our classes with the kids, we're all with kids, but we move our attention from one to another. So we're always really careful to say, oh, this has been a great conversation or something like this. I'm going to move my attention now to somebody else. I'll be with you in a minute. So just being really clear on those things. I would also say like to take some of this off of you because we live in a space where everything is very short, um, clamoring for our attention and not long enough to really hold it for very long. So it teaches us to only pay attention to very short periods of time. So people, kids, like if you watch things for them, it's like blah, blah, moving to the next thing, blah, blah, moving to the next thing. Everything is short. You know, it's like for me, it's very challenging to watch things like that. But that's what kids programming looks like. So even if you yourself are like not on a device, totally with them, somehow don't have to engage with the modern world at all, you still have all these things between your home and things that they see in school, which are all reinforcing this short, flashy, bright, like blah, 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 blah for kids that is really difficult to combat. So the best to me that you can do is to keep talking about it. And I know they're really young, and it's not always going to be something that they can reflect back to you in words, but it does penetrate and it does keep that sort of intuition, knowing, attention with themselves alive. And that's what's most important.
And I think it's also great advice because if I have to say every time I switch attention why I'm doing it, it won't be like I have to switch my
Yeah.
attention because I just want to see how many likes my tweet got, right? Like there's something kind of sinister about that. Um,
I
so
need positive reinforcement
yeah,
right now.
because I just need another hit of dopamine. Well, I mean that's kind of accurate. So let's go on to another practicality, which is children's intuition. What does it even mean, and how do we help them get it back?
Okay. So intuition is that no, I would say knowing inside of you that is it's I'm gonna have to use a gesture because the it's hard for words, but if you imagine you can't see my stomach, so this is gonna be my stomach. It drops like this. It's like that knowing that is solid in you. Um, and we all have this. Um, the way we work with kids to help them, most kids have it, are in touch with it to some extent. For those that have really lost it, and for adults, what we tend to do is to just keep asking them, well, what do you feel? And where does it feel in your body? Intuition doesn't feel the same as fear. A lot of people behave out of fear and anxiety, and that usually feels in a different part of your body than when you know something is true. So paying attention to somatically what the feeling actually is important to be able to discern what's intuition and what's fear-based. And that discernment, I think, is incredibly important and actually very subtle to be able to know the difference between the two. So much of our behavior is out of fear. So much of our behavior is out of fear. Um, so we often will ask, well, what do you feel? How do you feel about it? And then let people, and especially with kids, let them choose. And that's how they learn for themselves. Okay, well, that feeling was a knowing and it was right. And I know I can trust it. And we trust them. So there's a lot of trust that happens in a space in all of our work, especially when we're outside, but even when we're in the classroom or the rooms that we're working in, to be able to say, you know what's best for you. So trust your intuition on when you're hungry. That's a really good example and such an easy one to use. When are you hungry? Eat. So we don't have set times for food. And I recognize again, a lot of these things, it's really easy. We're not talking about we're in a house, right? And their routines. It's very different. Um, but just being able to have those moments of, am I hungry? Do I know how to know if I'm hungry? And trusting that and then eating. Am I thirsty? Do I know how to know if I'm thirsty? Trust that and then drink or don't drink. Um, do I know how I feel in this moment? And then trusting that. That's how we kind of build it back in kids. And then as kids get older, we ask them, well, what's your feeling about the situation that you were describing? So let's say that's a challenging situation with another person. Well, what's your feeling about it? Where does it feel in your body? What do you actually feel is happening? Not what do you think? We're always saying, how do you feel? How do you feel? What do you feel? And that can be very powerful. And then us mirroring for them our intuition. So saying, oh, like today, one of our students was quite late. And I had a feeling that she had just arrived. So I walked down the hall and there she is. And I said, oh, I had a feeling you were here. So just constantly reinforcing that you can have a feeling or a knowing and have it be correct. And that also, I think, helps them recognize that that's valuable and important and not always to be locked up here.
Well, yeah, one of Mona's findings that she highlighted was that, intuitive abilities scale with your belief that they are possible. So you believing that you have intuition actually improves your intuition, which I guess makes sense in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very important to mirror a lot of these things for kids because they look to us to see how to be. And if you're not able to reflect it back to them, then they kind of lose it. It withers away. It's not nurtured.
Yeah, that's the worst thing I ever heard because my sister, my half sister, has four children around the ages of 30, and they're all spectacular in all different reasons and totally normal and well adjusted. And I once asked her and her husband what their secret was, and she was just like, "You have to lead by example." And I was like, "Ah, that was the last answer I wanted. That was the last answer." She's 60 and has a six pack, and I'm like, "Oh, I just can't. Could I not just tell them what to do?" But to your point is that they're always watching and they'll spot that hypocrisy, won't they?
Oh, and instantly. And they not only do they notice it, but it subtly changes how they then interact with you and how they take what you then say afterwards. So it slowly erodes the relationship when you lie.
So a big part of your process is art, and there's a non-trivial part of myself that immediately gets triggered. It's like art, like oh, it's such a waste of time. Where's the money in art? Like what am I going to do? What am I going to get my children to do? Finger painting? And I understand that that's precisely everything that's wrong with the world, but like encapsulated in my personality. So like I don't need you to explain how terrible I am, but like what do you do around art that you think people can replicate at home, or at least they can understand in the way that they're raising their children?
Okay, first of all, though, you do art, you write.
I know it's taken me a really long time to make peace with the fact that like I am a creative of some kind, but even the word creative gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit.
Okay. Okay. First, I need to just level set. Like every single one of us is a creative being. Our very first class with kids is to talk about creativity. And we really have a conversation around the fact that every single one of us creates all the time. So we usually initially we talk about art and creativity, and that's where people's minds go. But then we say, well, what do we create with our actions? In every moment, you're creating something with your actions, with your thoughts, with your emotions, constantly creating. So you have to be creative because you're human and that's what we do. And I think that's a really powerful concept. So our work right now involves sort of more, let's say, traditional art, but the basis of this is this idea that we're creative beings and that we can be intentional and aware of what we're creating, or we can be totally unintentional and unaware of what we're creating. And I think most of us go through our day unaware of what we're creating. And the examples we use are things like somebody does something that we don't like, and we say something negative about them. Oh, that person sucks. Well, what do you create in that moment? You create a lot of negativity towards them, and that then comes back to you. So everything you give to somebody, it's right back at you. You can also create a lot of something else. So the example we always give with the kids is I go up to the person I work with and I give them a big hug and I ask them, what do I create with that action? And they'll say love or kindness or happiness or something like that. And I'll say, yeah, we can create in every moment different types of feelings. And then we get to be responsible for whatever it is that we create. So we use art as a way of one, teaching that idea that you're a creative being, and two, helping people process a lot of the things that are difficult to put into words. And it's interesting because for me personally, I also had that reaction to art. So when I think when I was 13, my art teacher held up what I had made and said, this is the worst thing I have ever seen. And uh, Allison, you should never do art or be an artist. Um, this is terrible. And she gave it an F. I'd never gotten an F on anything in my life. And I was so humiliated. I'm not even sure to this day why you would do that to a child. But from then on, I was like, art is not my thing. I don't do art. I have nothing to do with it. I played music, but I classified that as different. And I like to write, but I classified that as different. Um, and that experience, I think, is not unique, unfortunately. So helping kids understand that, one, all of us are artists, and two, whatever you create is what you need to be creating at that moment. And that it's a language that we can use when words kind of fall short. So later in life, I started drawing a lot of the things I would experience that I couldn't put into words. So when you ask these questions about like how we relate to children, for example, I have pictures. I understand it really in pictures, not so much in words. And there was a kid today who made a canvas of depression, of what it felt like for him to be depressed. And that said everything. It and I couldn't imagine him at the age of 9 putting that into words, but it's torn and it's ripped in different places. It's red and black. He even kicked it around the room because he knew that that action of feeling just discarded and being kicked needed to be reflected in the canvas, even if nobody else was seeing that that's what had happened. You know, it's not like it had toe marks. He didn't, but it just was embodied into the work, all the feeling of feeling just dejected and worthless. So that's why art. And if you can bring that to your children, whether it's through visual arts or music or writing or literally anything, it gives them an outlet to express what they've been experiencing and to process it really rapidly. So as he's making this, the kid next to him is identifying with it. They're having a conversation about why they're feeling that way, and then they move past it on their own. They don't need us. They didn't need to go talk to somebody else about it. They just moved through it. We've had kids process the loss of pets through art and parents through art and all of these things. And it's well known that it's effective. It's not revolutionary, but if you combine that with your attention, you suddenly get something that's really, really powerful and really transformative for children.
Yeah, I mean, I find that story very powerful because also, I've had my own struggles with mental health over the years, and I found that one of the ways that I was always told to deal with it, if at all, was to go into a room and talk about it. And I always found that like wildly, wildly counterproductive because I'm highly mentalized and verbal. And so I just found it was like turning the scalpel on myself and being like, why am I sad? Why am I sad? Can my words find out why I'm sad? And it was just catastrophic.
Mhm. Mhm.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's that, and also likewise when we tell them, for example, like tomorrow in our storytelling class, we're asking them to create a hero story for themselves. And if you watch them, they can do the converse. So you can take something that's really difficult and process it through art. And you can also take the opposite and say, well, what are all the beautiful things? So we often ask, what gifts do you have to bring to the world? Things like, what are your superpowers? What's your magic? And we use art in that way too. Yesterday, we did a class in Detroit, and one of the students, when we asked about their superpowers, they made this beautiful picture of all these different colors and put a heart on it, and then said that their superpower was to bring all this beautiful colors and love into the world. And you could say those words, but when you see that, it's like, yeah, that's it. It's totally, and that's how she worked it out. It was amazing.
I gotta tell you a story. So, well, you spent minutes with my boy Jack, and when we spoke afterwards, you said he's incredibly observant, and brilliantly, I didn't notice that he was incredibly observant, which I thought was hilarious. And we have an excellent teacher, and what she did was his previous teacher basically called him the mayor. because he was like the mayor of the class, where whenever anyone did anything wrong, he's got a very finely developed sense of justice and he's incredibly observant. So he's like, Allison just did something. So he was a massive snitch. And instead, his teacher, she declared him chief kindness noticer and gave him stickers. And so whenever he saw an act of kindness, he had to go and give someone a sticker. And me and my wife were just, we were blown away for weeks because not only did she identify something that we've now really lent into and kind of reinforcing as his gift, but she'd framed it as something in a positive way. And it's been absolutely transformational to him.
I love that story. Yeah, he is incredibly observant. Like, one of the most observant humans, full stop, let alone children I've ever met. It's really fun to be in a room with him because nothing escapes him. So you're in a much more challenging situation than most parents, I feel like. Like,
Oh no.
nothing's
Yeah.
getting past that kid.
Oh, Jesus, I'm gonna have to give away my cell phone. Um, so I can't resist this just because this is the way I work, but you're obviously a consciousness researcher as well. And you have like one of the clearest explanations of consciousness that I've ever heard in like your delightful, plain speaking way, where you talk about, the place you can create from and the place that you can't, and your relationship with that, which also I think plays into children and all of us. Would you mind just giving me like a super quick recap of that?
Yeah. Uh, so this is just my perspective. I feel like it's really important to say this. This is not capital T truth by any means, not purporting that to be the case. Um, so as I had mentioned earlier, us being creative beings. So my understanding, my perspective is that our consciousness is what allows us to create. And it's it's really just that simple. We have a connection to something that I'm going to call entanglement at large, but you can call it whatever you want to call it. Let's say it's the thing that's bigger than all of us. I used to call it the space because that was how I identified it until I met somebody who I wrote a book on consciousness with, and we called it entanglement at large. Basically, it's the space of no separation. So if you've been in a state where you've experienced no separation between you and anything else in the world, that's that space. And so ideas and things can come, or not in things, be specific. The ideas can come in from that space, as well as everything that's ever happened in history can come in from that space. Um, our consciousness is an awareness of our history. And because we have an awareness of our history, we can create. So creativity, the ability to create, is to make something new. And this isn't something that, in my perspective, other animals or plants have. So they have a lot of ability to follow their biological programs and do the things that they've been sort of programmed to do. But we as humans, we can imagine something new, but by pulling from our history, things that we've already experienced, and by combining from this sort of space of no separation, these ideas, and we can make something new. So for example, I can ask you to imagine a purple elephant, and you've never seen a purple elephant, but you can imagine it, and you could create it. You could make it out of clay, you could draw a picture of it, you could do something to it, or do something with that idea. So that for me is what makes humans unique, and how we use our consciousness, and why it's so important for us to be aware of our history, to be aware of what we're creating in every moment. Because without that, all we're doing is just following sort of pre-programmed patterns and behavioral patterns that we've adopted, or social conditionings, or whatever you want to call it, in sort of an automatic way. And I mean, yeah, you can do that. I don't want to judge that. It's totally fine if you want to do that. It moves you in a different space than what we're talking about here, with being able to have attention and intuition and all those other things. Those things come about when you're connected to yourself and not just following behavioral patterns.
So I have this thing that's been floating around my head for the last few
Mm.
weeks, and you know how weird I am, but it's this idea that one, what you just talked about in terms of the ability to visualize and create and imagine is something that is incredibly important. And I don't think I fully understand yet. But also this idea of creating with love, as much as I hate that word because it's so imprecise, that basically all of our intuitive abilities seem to scale with love, which means you get more subtle power, but you also don't want the power because you're very loving. It's not manipulation. You just gain the ability to influence as a result of your lovingness. And so it's this idea of like, what would you create if you were in your most loving state? Or if if you could bring what you love most into the world, what would that look like?
Mhm.
And these things are all kind of coalescing around this one idea, but I haven't really worked it out yet. And I'm just going to kind of throw the ball to you. Does any of that resonate? Like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, I feel like so what I would say is creating from there's two things that come to mind. So one, creating from alignment with yourself or kind of what's what's best for you and really knowing what's best for you. That's very important. It's not as easy as it sounds. Um, Usually leads to the best possible outcome for yourself. And when it comes to the love part, my experience is that if you take the perspective of no separation, that I'm really me and I'm really you and you're really me, and this computer isn't really here, and all of it's just sort of not what it seems, right? Um, then my love for myself is my love for you, and vice versa. And so having an awareness and a care for oneself ensures that one behaves in a way that's best for you. And that is therefore, by that property of the fact that we're the same, also best for you. And so this is something I talk to parents about a lot and adults about a lot, that people will do things and say, I'm doing it for my children. And then they run themselves down into a terrible state. Or I'm staying married for my children, but they're miserable in their marriage. If you have the understanding that actually there is no separation, then doing something that is terrible for you is never better for somebody else. It just isn't. So by creating from a space of love for ourselves, it necessarily ends up creating wonderful or better things for other people, even if on the surface it might not always appear that way. It's just important to understand that all we know is this moment. We don't know the next moment. And we spend an awful lot of our time trying to manipulate and figure out what the next moment is going to be and the moment 10 years from now is going to be. It's just a lot of energy in a direction that isn't always beneficial. And if you stay with what's present for you and you create from that space of what is the most loving thing I can do right now for myself, it ends up being the most loving thing you can do for everybody. Uh, I can give you an example. Would an
Oh, yeah,
example help? Yeah.
an example.
So, uh, so back in 2019, I think 2020, something like that. So I was married, and my former husband got a job in Montana, and we were living in California. And he was coaching soccer, and that was his dream. He always wanted to coach soccer, and it was college level. It was awesome. He was so excited for him. And I didn't want to move to Billings, Montana. And I had this feeling that it just wasn't the right place for me to be. So, and again, that intuition. And then, so we stayed together, and then he got a job in West Virginia. And I just knew I am not meant to be in West Virginia. It's not for me. So what felt the most loving to me was to say, okay, I'm not going to go to West Virginia because that would make me bitter and resentful and angry at some point. I know it, I can feel it, and I could fight it for some amount of time, but what's the point? So I said, let's separate. And then when he moved to West Virginia, I had this feeling that he was going to become a father. So I said, oh, I think you're going to become a father. And I don't want to have to go through a divorce when that happens. It's going to be a nightmare. So why don't we go through a divorce now? and it sucked. And in the moment, everybody was like, what are you doing? Why would you do this? And I kept saying, because it's the most loving thing I can do for myself, and it's therefore the most loving thing I can do for him. And sure enough, a year later, he had a son, he became a father, and he's moving again. And it just would have made no sense for me to constrict ourselves and to make myself be miserable for him, to prove that I loved him, or for me to try to hold on to him to prove that I love him. The way to show love is to say, yeah, go live your life. I'm going to go live my life. You go live your life. It's perfect. And I couldn't have seen now 4 years down the road where it would have been. And in the moment, it wasn't the most fantastic experience, but it was one of my favorite things I've helped co-create.
See, you've hit one of the things here, which is I had a horrifying career transition of my own, and I've spent the last 3, 4 years speaking to probably hundreds of people about following their intuition towards a life they know they should be leading. But one, I think they don't love themselves enough or have profound enough inner guidance to know when they're chasing the right thing, and then a belief that if they do chase that thing, they'll be loved. They'll be held in this kind of safe situation. And there are examples about dads having midlife crises and leaving to follow a dream that they thought they had, and then everything falls apart, and the family, they desert their family. And there is this reality that in all my work, the number one thing people come back with is this idea of like, my kids need me, and how do I pursue what I love without betraying my kids? I know there's a middle ground there, but like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So I would say you're right. There is a middle ground. So the idea of I'm going to go pursue this and leave my children is there's a responsibility that we all have as people who care for children to do that, to care for them. So that does exist. And I'm not sure that it's the most loving thing to sever your relationship with your child for yourself or for them, really, you know? Um, but yeah, it's so interesting. There's this sort of I'm going to call it a social conditioning because that's what it feels like. There's like a social conditioning that's like, leave everything behind and pursue your thing, and you'll be a hero in doing that. And that's also just not for everybody, two, really not true for most people. Uh, so my feeling is with your question that this is where the intuition becomes really important and not necessarily following the program. Because I do get a lot of questions from adults, because I work with adults that will say things like, okay, I'm just going to leave my job and I'm going to pursue this thing. And I'm like, okay, you're jumping off a cliff, but is that the cliff you want to be jumping off of? How do you know what the thing is that you really want to do? How much time have you really spent understanding what you're here to do? What gifts you have to bring? Like, what's guiding you towards this direction? I wish I had a really simple answer, but my feeling is, as parents, there's a responsibility to your children to not abandon them, if you can avoid doing that. And there, to our point earlier about explaining to them what you're doing, a 3-year-old is not going to understand. Right? I've decided I need to go move to another country and start this business without you. They're not going to get that. They're going to feel very abandoned. Even though as I'm saying it, this though, Tom, like, there's a part of me that thinks, well, I don't know, maybe for some people that is really what's true. So I'm not here to judge or know what's true for everybody, but I would take it very seriously, your responsibility to your kids.
Sounds like a strange thing to say, but um, before I left my last job to start this company, I sat again, my 5-year old boy, down. And I said to him, Jack, Daddy's leaving his job and it might make you a little bit financially uncertain. Not super financially uncertain, but a little bit. But Daddy found something that's worth failing at. Like I found something I believed in so much it was worth failing at. And he, 90% chance he has no idea what I'm talking about. But for me, it just cemented in my mind that this was worth doing. But it also, the fact that he didn't care removed a weight in my mind that like, of course he doesn't care. He's five, like, but it didn't stop me getting in my head about like, am I screwing over his future? And like, I always think that, when I was 9, I moved from an ambassador's residence in Mexico, like a multi-room mansion with staff, to a small terraced house owned by my dad, a civil servant in London, because you have this massive lifestyle downgrade. You notice the difference for about a week, maybe less, and then you're like, cool, guess we're in a smaller house. And I feel that like a lot of people I speak to, they see their life as just more uncertainty with fewer bedrooms, and they don't see what's on the other side of that. And whilst the responsibility is important, people, I told this to someone the other day, and we both nearly ended up crying. It was bizarre, where it's like, do you believe that the universe loves you? Do you believe that if you hit the right leap, everything's going to be okay? And I feel that's one of the biggest questions of our lives and our time. And it's easy to say that you have the answer one way or another, but my God, I don't know if you do.
Well, I feel like so much of that depends on are you doing so many things here? Sorry.
Mm.
There's the question of are you doing the thing that's really in alignment with you? And then there's also an understanding that you can be loved and held and had and still have it be really, really difficult. It, it's again this other narrative of, oh, I leapt and then I was held and I got all this money and everything was great. And it's like that's sure that's some people's story. But for a lot of people, they jump into something that they know they're meant to do, but they aren't yet equipped to do it. And so then there's this whole forging of a person that has to happen to be able to meet the thing that they want to actually do. So as an example, this is a small example, but I had this idea for an explanation of entanglement as an experience in a art installation piece. So I wanted to build a giant geodesic dome with lasers and sound. And when you pass through one laser beam, it would change the color in another part instantaneously and change the sound. So everybody could be moving about and changing the color and the sound immediately to understand how we're constantly influencing and affecting everybody. I have never built anything before. I know nothing about lasers. I know nothing about sound. But I submitted this application for this to a museum in Santa Cruz and it was accepted. And I got a grant to build it. So here I am, like all the universe is supporting me. And then all of a sudden, I don't actually know how to do this. So now it's not pleasant, let's say. I mean, it's fine, but it's also a huge struggle from a lot of different perspectives to try to figure out how to do this. It ended up costing way more than the grant had actually been for. It was a very challenging experience. And the whole way, I can say I was absolutely held and loved by the universe. And it felt awful the whole time.
Right.
So I do feel like we have to understand that like love doesn't always look like cuddles and rainbows and butterflies. Love sometimes looks like, okay, go get torn up and hurt and learn how to swim on your own in the deep end of the pool. That's also a loving thing to do, to let someone go and figure it out for themselves. Yeah, I just feel like it's important to disabuse people of that notion that everything is always so soft, because we're meant to be outgrowing ourselves every day, and outgrowing yourself every day doesn't always look nice. If you think of a child who learns how to walk, sometimes they fall a lot as they try to learn how to walk, and they hurt themselves, and they just keep getting up and doing it again. That's what life is. And as adults, we get so afraid of all of that. We think, oh, we're not being supported every time we fall down. But no, you're building the muscles to be able to walk and then to run. It's what it is.
This may be obvious to a lot of people, but as I've been writing this series over weeks, and really it's the product of 10 years work, I've realized how central this idea of play is, but play as exploration within a safe container. So, like when you run after your toddler laughs rather than
Yeah.
screams. Because your toddler knows you're not gonna eat her when you catch her, right? But it still simulates the fear of being chased.
Hmm.
And it makes me think of spaces and maybe what you want to build with the epicenter, where it's like, how can we help build spaces in our own lives and in our kids' lives so that they can have this experience of being beat up without actually being beaten up?
Hmm. Yeah, to be able to know to push the boundaries and as far as you think you possibly can, and then to realize they can go even further. And that's what play really allows you to do. It tests all of those boundaries in lots of different ways. It's so important. And we as adults don't really tend to do that very often. And it's helpful if we can. I mean, circling back to some of the things that you can do with your kids, play is a huge thing. They love it when adults play with them, love it. And if you're able to engage in imaginative play, even better, because now you're able to push their imagination and move storylines and push ideas of what could be true and what's possible. And that just really expands their minds into the space of kind of the unknown and the limitless potential that exists, which is true.
Well, I mean, I find that their eyebrows immediately raise the moment they see me, holding a laser gun made out of my fingers, and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, Daddy's imagining, Daddy's playing," and and then I find myself taken away by my phone. It's just such a weird dynamic where it almost feels like this external force, these little fingers grabbing me and taking me back to, the notifications. But I have noticed that imaginative play certainly seems better. Um, all right, so we've gone on the full hour, but appreciate this is like an open-ended question, but let's land this back down. If people are coming away from this podcast and they're like, okay, cool, give us a summary. Like how can we approach parenting? How can we think about parenting? Like if we could download your incredible brain into both like ourselves and in our relationships with our kids, what are some things we could take away from the conversation?
To focus, to spend time learning how to focus and to be able to use that then in all manner of your life, to know yourself as a creative being, to understand that you create the environment that you're in and that your child is in, and that they, because they're a kid, are really subject to the environment that you create. So the things that they experience are direct results of the environment that you're creating. This is not to say it's judgy things or to put too much pressure on. It's just simply what it is. So the more aware you can be of the environment that you're creating, the feeling of that environment, the more you'll be able to understand how your kids are responding and better understand their behavior. Be able to really talk to your children, understand them as equals in a lot of ways. As intuitive beings, you probably see things and know things that you don't yet see or know, which again, not to rely on them as the seers of the family or as the intuitive people in the family. I see people do that also. That's very unfair.
Hmm.
To recognize that they know things for themselves and to trust them in their knowing, to respect their autonomy as beings. And also to understand that if none of this is something you want to do, that's okay too. This is not a space of thou shalt. Right? This is here's something that we've tried and it's worked really well. If you want to try it, great. And if you don't want to try it, that's great too. Uh, there's a lot of pressure I feel like put on parents and put on kids. And we experience so many of the kids that we work with as having very high levels of anxiety, very high levels of depression, just a lot of when we're around them, this feeling of like this this very like womp, 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 womp feeling, just very sort of dysregulated vibration. And and just understanding that that's coming from the world. It's not necessarily just coming from you. And the more that we can all kind of recognize and be aware of this and be present with them and say, yeah, we see that, we feel that, just the more they can breathe a sigh of, okay, I'm not alone in this. And maybe the last thing is remember play and art. Art is a really powerful tool to help us process what we're experiencing, and so is play. And you were a kid once, so enjoy them. They're fun. You know, kids are really fun. I spend all day playing. It's kind of fabulous.
Mm.
Uh, and if you can remember some of those things, hopefully that'll help a bit and make the process of raising them and the responsibility of raising them be a little bit more enjoyable than it probably already is, because they are such fun, amazing people.
Yeah, they are. This is one of my favorite interviews ever. It's beautiful. You've been amazing. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Alison, and take care, guys.
Thank you.